The housekeeper who found the same guest checked in. Under different names. Motel 6, Tucson, Arizona. Maria had worked housekeeping at the same motel for 11 years. She knew every room the way you know a place you've spent more time in than your own home. The way room 108 always smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, no matter how many times it was cleaned. The way the carpet in the East Wing was a slightly different shade than the rest, because it had been replaced after a flood in 2019. The way the ice machine on the second floor made a sound like a cough at exactly 10 past every hour. She knew the rhythms of the place. She knew when something was wrong. It started in February. A guest checked into room 112 under the name Robert Haley. Mid-50s, quiet, paid cash. Stayed 3 nights. Maria cleaned his room each morning. Unremarkable. A suitcase, some toiletries, a paperback left face down on the nightstand. He checked out on a Thursday without incident. 2 weeks later, a guest checked into room 112 under the name David Mercer. Mid-50s, quiet, paid cash. Maria noticed the similarity when she went in to turn the room over. The suitcase was a different color but the same brand. The toiletries were arranged in exactly the same order along the bathroom shelf. Shaving cream, then deodorant, then a small bottle of cologne. The paperback on the nightstand was a different title, but the same publisher. Left face down at almost exactly the same page thickness. She mentioned it to the front desk. The night clerk shrugged. Lots of people looked similar. Lots of people paid cash. David Mercer checked out on a Thursday. 3 weeks after that, room 112 again. James Whitfield, mid-50s, cash, quiet. This time, Maria paid close attention. She noted everything. The suitcase, different color again, same brand. The toiletries, same order, same products. The paperback, different title, same publisher, same page thickness. And something new she hadn't noticed before, or hadn't thought to look for. A small framed photograph on the nightstand. A woman and a child, smiling, in front of a house. She didn't touch it, but she noted it. James Whitfield checked out on a Thursday. Maria went to the manager, described what she'd observed across 3 separate stays. The manager listened, looked mildly uncomfortable, and told her she was probably reading too much into a coincidence. Similar-looking guests, similar habits. Nothing more. Maria was not satisfied. She started keeping a written log. Dates, names, room assignments, observations. Over the next 4 months, the same man. She was now certain it was the same man. Checked in 7 more times. Always room 112 when available, the nearest available room when not. Always a different name. Always mid-50s. Always cash. Always the same suitcase brand. The same toiletry arrangement. The same paperback ritual. And always, on the nightstand, the same photograph. The woman and the child in front of the house. On his 10th visit, Maria did something she had never done in 11 years of housekeeping. She waited. She finished her shift, changed out of her uniform, and sat in her car in the parking lot, watching room 112. At 11:40 p.m., the light went off. At 12:15 a.m., the curtain moved, just once. At 12:22 a.m., the man left the room. He walked to the east end of the parking lot, got into a dark sedan, and drove to the far corner of the lot where the overhead light had been broken for weeks. He sat there for 40 minutes. Just sat. Then he drove back, parked in front of room 112, and went back inside. Maria wrote down the license plate. She gave it to her brother-in-law, who was a retired police officer. He ran it as a favor. The plate came back registered to a Robert Haley, an address in Phoenix, and a flag, a restraining order, filed by a woman whose name Maria didn't recognize, prohibiting Robert Haley from coming within 500 feet of her home, or her child. The motel was 11 miles from that address. Maria went to the police the next morning with her log. 4 months of documented visits, names used, dates, observations. Everything she had written down because no one had taken her seriously. They took her seriously now. Robert Haley, or David Mercer, or James Whitfield, or any of the other 6 names in Maria's log, was arrested 2 days later, in room 112, with a collection of photographs in his suitcase that made it very clear what the motel had been serving as for the past 6 months: a base, a watching point, close enough to feel proximity, far enough to avoid the restraining order's boundary. The woman and child in the photograph were his ex-wife and daughter. They were safe. They didn't know how close he had been, or for how long. The manager who had told Maria she was reading too much into a coincidence did not last the month. Maria still works at the motel. Different room assignments now. She asked to be moved off the East Wing permanently. The manager, the new one, agreed without asking why. She still keeps a log of every guest, every room, every detail that doesn't sit right. 11 years had taught her that the rhythms of a place matter, that when something breaks the rhythm, you write it down. She was right about that. She had always been right about that. Nobody listened until she had 4 months of proof. She makes sure now that she never needs 4 months again. The front desk clerk who received a complaint from a room that was empty. The Grand Harlow was the kind of hotel that had been grand once and was now just trying to remember what that felt like. High ceilings that used to gleam, now slightly yellowed. A chandelier in the lobby that worked on 3 of its 5 circuits. Carpets that had been good quality in 1987 and now just looked tired in the particular way that quality things look when they've been used for too long without enough care. Tyler had worked the front desk night shift for 8 months, 23 years old, paying his way through community college, the overnight shift the only one that fit his class schedule. He had the particular skill of the night shift worker, the ability to stay alert while appearing to do nothing, the ability to process boredom as a neutral state rather than an uncomfortable one. He had heard every kind of guest complaint: noise, temperature, plumbing, neighbors, Wi-Fi. The minibar being stocked with the wrong brand of sparkling water, which had been genuinely a 15-minute conversation at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. He had never received a complaint from a room with no one in it. It was a Wednesday in November. The hotel was at 30% capacity. Slow season, conference crowd gone, the long, quiet stretch before the holiday bookings picked up. Tyler was at the desk at 1:40 a.m., working through a reading assignment for his Tuesday class, the lobby empty, the phone silent. It rang at 1:47 a.m. internal line. Room 404. He answered, standard greeting. A voice, male, older, slightly muffled as though the caller was not holding the phone close to his mouth, said, "There is someone in the hallway outside my room. They have been standing there for a long time. I would like someone to check." Tyler noted the complaint, told the guest he would send someone to check the 4th floor hallway, and called the night maintenance man, Pete, who doubled as informal security during the overnight hours. Pete went up, Came back down 10 minutes later. Fourth floor hallway was empty. No one there. Tyler called room 404 back to let the guest know. The phone rang 11 times. No answer. He assumed the guest had gone back to sleep, noted it in the log, moved on. At 3:15 a.m., the phone rang again. Room 404. Same voice, same slight muffling. The person is still there. I can hear them breathing outside the door. Tyler frowned. Told the guest he'd send someone up again. Called Pete again. Pete went up again. He came back down faster this time. He stood at the desk and looked at Tyler with an expression Tyler had never seen on Pete's face in 8 months. Room 404, Pete said. Who did you say called from there? Guest complaint, Tyler said. Why? Pete turned the monitor on the desk toward Tyler. The booking system. Room 404. Checked out 2 days ago. Not reassigned. Currently unoccupied, unbooked, and locked. Tyler stared at the screen. He looked at his call log. 2 calls. 1:47 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. Both registered as originating from the room 404 internal line. Both clear as day in the system. From a room with no guest. From a phone in a locked, empty room. Pete went back up with the master key this time. Tyler watched on the security monitor. Room 404, empty. Bed made from the last cleaning 2 days prior, untouched. Bathroom empty. Closet empty. The phone sitting in its cradle on the nightstand. Pete picked up the phone, checked for a dial tone. There was one. He checked the line connection. Normal. There was no explanation for how 2 outgoing calls had been placed from that phone. The system showed the calls. The room showed nothing. Tyler filed the report. The hotel's telephone contractor came in the next day and spent 3 hours going through the system. His conclusion was a technical anomaly, a crossed line somewhere in the aging internal switchboard, causing calls from another room to register as originating from 404. Plausible. Technically possible. The other room the contractor identified as the likely source of the crossed line was room 414. Room 414 had also been unoccupied for 2 days. The contractor revised his conclusion to a system glitch and left without further explanation. Tyler finished his shift that morning and sat in his car in the parking garage for a long time before driving home. He went over it the way you go over things that don't add up, looking for the angle that makes it make sense. He never fully found it. He worked the Grand Harlow for 4 more months before his schedule changed, and he moved to a day position at a different hotel. In those 4 months, room 404 was rented out regularly. No more complaints, no more calls. But Tyler never walked past room 404 without glancing at the gap under the door, just to check whether the light inside was on or off. It was always off. He told himself that was a good sign. He was never entirely sure he believed it. The night auditor who noticed a guest never left their room. For 11 days. The Pelican Inn sat 2 blocks from the seawall in Galveston, the kind of budget motel that catered to off-season fishermen, long-haul truckers, and people who needed a place to stay that didn't ask too many questions. Sandra had been the night auditor for 3 years. Her job was numbers, reconciling the day's transactions, running the end-of-day reports, making sure what the system said matched what had actually happened. She was good at it. She liked the silence of the overnight hours, the particular stillness of a motel at 3 a.m., the feeling of being awake while the world slept. She noticed the discrepancy on day 4. A guest named Carl Pruitt had checked into room 1911 days before, paid 2 weeks up front in cash, asked not to be disturbed for housekeeping. This was not unusual. Long-stay guests often declined daily housekeeping. Sandra had noted it, flagged it in the system as a guest preference, moved on. But on day 4, she noticed something while running her reports. Room 19's keycard had not been used since check-in, not once. The door had not been opened, according to the electronic lock system, since Carl Pruitt had entered on the first day. She checked the record twice. The log was clear. Keycard, last used. Day 1, 4:47 p.m., 4 days ago. She assumed the card had malfunctioned. It happened. She cut a new one and put it in an envelope at the desk in case he came to ask for it. He didn't come to ask for it. On day 7, she ran the report again as part of her routine audit. Room 19 keycard. Last used, day 1, 4:47 p.m. Still, 7 days. The door had not opened in 7 days. She walked to room 19 at 2 a.m., stood outside the door and listened. She could hear the television, faint through the door. The sound of voices, a laugh track. She knocked gently. No answer. She told herself he was asleep with the TV on. Told herself the key card reader was glitched and not logging correctly. Told herself there was nothing wrong. On day 9, she told the manager. He listened, looked uncomfortable, and said they'd give it until the 2-week mark since the guest had paid for 2 weeks and had the legal right to occupy the room. On day 11, Sandra decided she was not waiting until day 14. She knocked on room 19 at 1:30 a.m. Knocked again, called through the door. The television was still on. Same low murmur of voices. She used the master key. Carl Pruitt was in the room, alive, sitting in the chair by the window in the dark, facing the door as though he had been expecting her. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. He was just sitting. Sandra asked if he was all right. He said very quietly, "I didn't want to leave." She asked him when he had last eaten. He thought about it for a long moment, as though the question required real calculation. Then he said he wasn't sure. Sandra called the manager. The manager called an ambulance. Carl Pruitt had not left that room in 11 days. He had not eaten in what the paramedics estimated was at least 4 days. He was severely dehydrated. He was, in the clinical language of the report filed afterward, in the middle of a serious mental health crisis, one that had apparently been building for a long time before he had checked into room 19 of the Pelican Inn with 2 weeks of cash and a desire to disappear. He was taken to the hospital. He received care. Sandra learned months later through a roundabout chain of information that he had recovered and had family who had been looking for him. She thought about that for a long time, about how close it had come, about day 14, which the manager had been willing to wait for, about the key card log that had been quietly telling the truth every single night while everyone found reasons not to listen to it. She still runs the reports every night, still checks the key card logs. There is now a policy at the Pelican Inn, her policy, which she wrote herself and the new manager signed without argument, that any room showing no key card activity for more than 48 hours gets a welfare check. No exceptions. Carl Pruitt's room has been rented out many times since. Different guests, different lives, different reasons for being in Galveston in the off-season. Sandra always glances at the key card log when room 19 comes up in her reports. Some habits are built from the right kind of fear, the kind that reminds you that the numbers, if you read them carefully enough, are always trying to tell you something. The bellboy who was asked to deliver a key to someone already standing inside. The Whitmore was old Chicago money made into architecture. Marble floors, brass fixtures, a manually operated elevator that was kept running more as an aesthetic choice than a practical one. The kind of hotel where the staff wore uniforms that had barely changed since 1962, and the guests expected a level of service that required you to anticipate needs before they were expressed. Daniel had been a bellboy at the Whitmore for 14 months. He was 20 years old, and he was good at the job in the way that quiet, observant people are good at jobs that require quiet observation. He noticed things. He remembered faces. He knew which guests wanted conversation and which wanted to be invisible, and he calibrated accordingly. He had never in 14 months been asked to do something that he couldn't find a rational explanation for within a few minutes, until the night of the key. It was a Friday in March, just past midnight. Daniel was working the late shift, the hotel at near capacity for a conference. The lobby had quieted after the post-dinner rush, the last stragglers from the hotel bar drifting toward the elevators. The front desk called him over. A key card needed to be delivered to room 718. The guest had called down saying their card had stopped working and they were locked out. Standard procedure. Daniel would take the new card up, verify the guest's identity by asking for their name and ID if the door was open, or slide it under if they requested. He took the elevator to the 7th floor, walked to room 718, knocked and announced himself. The door opened immediately, as though the person on the other side had been standing right behind it. The man was mid-40s, in a dress shirt, jacket off, the look of someone who had been in meetings all day. He held out his hand for the key card. Daniel asked for his name for verification as procedure required. The man said, "James Calloway, room 718. Daniel handed over the card. The man took it, nodded, and closed the door. Daniel rode the elevator back down, logged the delivery, moved on. 20 minutes later, the front desk phone rang. Daniel was close enough to hear the clerk's side of the conversation. Then he watched the clerk's expression shift. The clerk hung up and looked at Daniel. "Did you deliver that key to 718? The clerk asked. 20 minutes ago, Daniel said. James Calloway, he verified. The clerk turned the monitor toward him. The booking for room 718, James Calloway, checked in that afternoon. And below it, the key card log. The original key card, the one the guest had called down to say wasn't working. Last used 40 seconds ago. After Daniel had already delivered the replacement, the original key card had been used to enter room 718 40 seconds before the replacement was delivered, which meant, if the log was accurate, that someone had been inside room 718 using the original key card at the exact moment James Calloway was standing at the open door asking for the replacement. Or, the other possibility, the one that Daniel stood in the lobby processing while the night clerk called up to room 718 and got no answer. James Calloway had never left his room, had never been locked out, had never called the front desk. They sent Daniel back up with the clerk this time. Knocked, no answer. Used the master. James Calloway was in bed, asleep, in the deep and genuine way of someone who had been out for hours. His original key card was on the nightstand. The replacement was not in the room. He had not called the front desk. He had been asleep since 11. The call log showed an internal call from room 718 at 12:04 a.m., There was no disputing it. The call had been made from that room's phone, while James Calloway was asleep in that room's bed. The man who had answered the door, the man who had said James Calloway's name and room number and taken the key card from Daniel's hand, was never identified. The hotel's 7th floor corridor camera showed Daniel walking to room 718, knocking, and the door opening. The angle was wrong for a clear view of the person inside the door. What it showed was a male figure, dress shirt, the door closing after the key card was exchanged. Security reviewed every piece of footage from that evening. No one matching the description entered or left the 7th floor through any documented access point during the relevant window. The replacement key card was never found. James Calloway was told there had been a system error. He accepted this and checked out the next morning without incident. He had slept, he said, extremely well. Daniel finished the shift, wrote up his account in precise detail while it was fresh, gave it to the head of security, who thanked him and filed it. He worked at the Whitmore for 6 more months. In that time, he delivered keys to dozens of rooms without incident. But he always, after that night, took an extra second at the door before handing anything over, looking at the person in front of him with the particular attention of someone who had learned that verification had limits, that a name and a room number were not on their own proof of anything. The hotel camera that showed someone walking the halls who wasn't a guest. Kevin had been the overnight security monitor at the Sleep Easy Inn for 2 years. His job was simple in theory. Watch the screens, log anything unusual, call the manager if something required a physical response. 6 cameras covering the 2 main corridors, the lobby, the parking lot, the stairwells. Most nights, nothing happened. Occasionally, a guest locked themselves out. Once a month or so, someone would have a loud argument that required a knock on the door. Twice in 2 years, Kevin had called the police. Once for a fight in the parking lot, once for a guest who had become threatening at the front desk. What happened on the Thursday night in September was something he had no category for. It started at 2:08 a.m. Camera 3, the 2nd floor east corridor, showed a figure walking slowly down the hall. This was not unusual in itself. Guests moved around at night, got ice, used the vending machine at the end of the hall. Kevin noted it out of habit and watched. The figure was male, tall, wearing dark clothing, walking slowly, hands at his sides, looking straight ahead. He reached the end of the corridor where the vending machine alcove was and turned the corner. Kevin switched to the alcove camera. The figure wasn't there. He switched back to the corridor camera. Empty. He checked the stairwell camera. Empty. The lobby camera. Empty. The other corridor. Empty. The figure had turned a corner and ceased to exist. Kevin rewound, watched it again. The figure walked the corridor, turned the corner. On the alcove camera, which had a clear view of the corner, nothing came around it. He logged it as a camera sync issue and moved on. These things happened. At 3:31 a.m., the figure appeared again. Same corridor, same direction, same slow walk, same dark clothing, same hands at the sides. Kevin watched more carefully this time. The figure passed door after door, 201, 203, 205. And Kevin noticed something he hadn't registered the first time. The figure didn't look at any of the doors, didn't slow down near them, wasn't checking numbers or looking for a room, just walking straight ahead. with the focused, purposeful stillness of someone who knew exactly where they were going. At the end of the corridor, the corner again. Kevin had the alcove camera already pulled up on the secondary monitor. The figure turned the corner. Nothing came around it. Kevin called the overnight front desk clerk and asked her to check the second floor east corridor. She went up, came back down, empty, checked all the ice and vending areas, empty. At 4:55 a.m., the figure appeared a third time. This time, Kevin noticed something that made him sit forward in his chair. The time stamp on camera 3 was running correctly. 4:55 a.m., moving forward in real time. But the time stamp on camera 2, which covered the lobby and should have been synced to the same system, was showing 4:53 a.m. A 2-minute discrepancy between cameras on the same system. He watched the figure walk the corridor for the third time. At the corner, he watched both the corridor camera and the alcove camera simultaneously. On the corridor camera, the figure turned the corner at 4:57 a.m. On the alcove camera at 4:55 a.m. 2 minutes earlier, a figure turned into the alcove from the corridor and walked toward the vending machine. Same figure, same clothing. 2 minutes apart on cameras that should have been showing the same moment, as though the figure existed in the 2-minute gap between what the cameras were seeing. Kevin called the manager. The manager came in at 6 a.m. and reviewed the footage with the hotel's security contractor. The contractor's conclusion was a server sync error, causing a timestamp drift between cameras, a known issue with the system that was on the list for a firmware update. The contractor also noted while reviewing the footage that the figure shown on camera 3 did not appear on any other camera during any of the 3 appearances. Not the lobby, not the stairwells, not the parking lot. No arrival, no departure. Just the corridor 3 times between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. The contractor had no explanation for that part. He said so, which Kevin respected. He wrote it up as an anomaly and recommended the firmware update be prioritized. The update was installed the following week. The timestamp drift was corrected. The figure was never seen on the cameras again. Kevin reviewed the guest log for that night against the corridor appearances. 2nd floor east, all guests in their rooms and accounted for during the relevant windows. He checked the former guest records next. Anyone who had stayed in that corridor recently, any incident associated with those rooms. Nothing unusual, routine turnover, routine guests. He checked the staff records. No maintenance or housekeeping scheduled for that floor during those hours. He found nothing, documented everything, filed it with the manager who filed it with the corporate office who sent back a form email acknowledging receipt. Kevin still works the overnight monitor position, different property now. He transferred 8 months after that September. Better equipment, newer building, cameras that don't drift. He still watches the corridors the same way, though, with the same attention, not looking for guests who are lost or arguing or locked out, looking for the particular quality of movement that is just slightly wrong, the walk that is too deliberate, the figure that knows exactly where it is going and arrives from nowhere and disappears the same way. He hasn't seen it again. He doesn't expect that to always be true. The patient in room 7, who died twice. There is a particular silence that exists only in hospitals at night. Not the silence of an empty place. Hospitals are never empty. It is the silence of a place where everyone is either unconscious or trying very hard to be quiet. where the loudest sounds are mechanical. The beep of monitors, the hiss of oxygen, the low industrial breath of the HVAC system that never stops moving air through corridors that smell of antiseptic and something underneath it that antiseptic was designed to cover. Rachel had been a night shift nurse at St. Augustine for 6 years. She knew that silence the way you know, the voice of someone you've lived with for a long time. She knew when it was normal and when it wasn't. The night it wasn't started with a routine check on room 7. The patient was an elderly man named Edmund Farrow, 78 years old, admitted 4 days earlier for complications following cardiac surgery. He was stable, not improving quickly, but stable. He slept most of the time. His daughter visited every afternoon and left by 7. He had no other regular visitors. Rachel checked on him at 2 a.m. as part of her rounds. Vitals stable, sleeping quietly. She noted it in the chart and moved on. At 2:34 a.m., the monitor for room 7 flatlined. She was at the nurse's station when the alarm triggered. She ran. The crash team was called. They worked on Edmund Farrow for 22 minutes before the attending physician called it. Time of death, 2:56 a.m. Rachel stood in the doorway of room 7 for a moment after the team filed out. The particular stillness of a room after. The monitor silenced. The mechanical sounds gone. Just the body of a man who had been alive 6 hours ago, when his daughter had kissed his forehead and told him she'd see him tomorrow. She went back to the nurse's station to begin the documentation. At 4:17 a.m., room 7's call button activated. Rachel stared at the board. The call light for room 7 was on, lit and steady. She looked at it for a full 5 seconds before she moved. She walked to room 7, opened the door. Edmund Farrow was lying exactly as the team had left him, undisturbed, still. The monitoring equipment disconnected and pushed to the side. His hands folded on the blanket over his chest the way the attending had arranged them. The call button was on the rail of the bed, pressed down. There was no one else in the room. Rachel stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she walked to the bed, looked at Edmund Farrow, looked at the call button, looked at his hands. Both folded on his chest, nowhere near the rail. She released the call button, went back to the station, wrote it in the log under anomalies. Call button activation, room 7, 4:17 a.m., no patient contact possible, cause undetermined. She finished her shift, told herself it was a mechanical fault. The next night, on a different shift, a different nurse found the call button for room 7 activated again. The room had been cleaned and reset. New patient not yet assigned. The button pressed with no one there to press it. Maintenance checked the unit. Found nothing wrong. Room 7 was reassigned 3 days later. The new patient, a middle-aged woman recovering from appendix surgery, asked to be moved on her second night. When the charge nurse asked why, she said she kept waking up with the feeling that someone was sitting in the chair beside her bed. The chair was always empty, but the feeling, she said, was very specific. The feeling of being watched by someone who was not concerned about being seen. She was moved. She recovered without incident. Rachel learned about the request through the floor's informal network of staff conversation. She didn't say anything about the call button. There was nothing to say that didn't sound like exactly what she was trying not to think. Edmund Farrow's daughter came to collect his belongings 2 days after his death. Rachel happened to be at the nurse's station. The daughter, a woman in her 50s, red-eyed but composed, stopped at the station on her way out and thanked the staff for their care. Then she paused and said something that Rachel has thought about every time she walks past room 7 since. She said, "He always hated being left alone, even as a child, apparently. My grandmother used to say he'd find a way to let you know." She said it lightly, the way people say things that mean more than they're prepared to examine. Then she thanked them again and left. Rachel watches the call board differently now, has for 2 years, not with fear exactly, more with a kind of acknowledgement. Some patients, she has come to believe, take longer to leave than others. Room 7 has had 14 patients since Edmund Farrow. 12 of them have asked at some point during their stay whether anyone else was in the room with them during the night. The answer is always no. Rachel always says it with complete professionalism. She has never been entirely sure it's true. The nurse who started hearing her own name called at 3 a.m. The human brain is extraordinarily good at pattern recognition. Too good, sometimes. It finds patterns in noise, in shadow, in the random distribution of sound through an old building's ventilation system. It finds voices in static, faces in ceiling tiles, names in the white noise of a busy floor going quiet. Diane knew all of this. She was a nurse. She understood the neuroscience. She had explained hypnagogic hallucinations to anxious patients more times than she could count. She told herself all of this on the 3rd night she heard her name. The first time was easy to dismiss. 2:58 a.m., East Corridor. She was coming out of a patient room and she heard, clearly, distinctly, her name. Diane. Spoken at a normal conversational volume, coming from somewhere down the hall. She looked. The corridor was empty. She stood there for a moment, then went back to her station. One of the other staff, calling her from around a corner, probably, sound carrying strangely. The building was 60 years old, and its acoustics had never been right. The second time was 4 nights later. 3:11 a.m. Same corridor, same conversational volume. Her name, once, clearly. She walked the entire East Corridor that time, checked every room with an open door, found nothing, checked the stairwell. Empty. She mentioned it to a colleague, framing it carefully, not as something supernatural, as an acoustic curiosity. Her colleague nodded. Said the East Corridor had always been weird for sound. Something about the way the ceiling met the walls, probably carrying voices from the floor above. The floor above East Corridor was the long-term care wing. Almost all the patients were nonverbal. The third time, Diane decided to be systematic. She told no one what she was doing. She simply started documenting. Date, time, precise location, direction the sound appeared to come from, what else was happening on the floor at that moment. She kept a small notebook in her scrub's pocket. Over the following 3 weeks, she documented 11 instances, always between 2:45 a.m. and 3:20 a.m. Always the East Corridor, always her name, once at normal conversational volume, never repeated when she stopped and listened. On the 12th instance, she did something different. Instead of turning to look, she stopped walking the moment she heard it, stayed completely still, and listened. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds, and then she heard it again, quieter this time. And this time, she could tell, with the particular certainty of someone who has been listening carefully for 3 weeks, that it was not coming from down the corridor. It was coming from behind the wall to her left, She was standing outside room 14E, a long-term care patient, an elderly woman named Agnes who had been largely unresponsive for 7 months following a severe stroke. Agnes's file noted that she had not spoken since admission, had not shown any voluntary communication of any kind. Diane went into the room. Agnes was lying in her bed, eyes open, which was not unusual. Agnes's eyes were often open without awareness behind them. But as Diane entered, Agnes's eyes moved, tracked to Diane's face, stayed there. Diane stood at the bedside, said hello, asked Agnes how she was feeling, the way you do regardless of whether you expect an answer. Agnes's mouth moved. No sound came out. Her vocal capacity was gone. The stroke had seen to that. But her mouth moved with the slow deliberateness of someone trying very hard to form a specific shape. Diane leaned closer. Agnes's mouth moved again. The shape of it, the way the lips pressed and released, was 2 syllables. A name. Not Diane's name. A different name entirely. Diane straightened up, checked the chart, cross-referenced the name she thought she'd seen Agnes mouth with Agnes's admission paperwork and next of kin information. The name Agnes had been trying to say was her daughter's name, a daughter who, according to the file, had not visited in 4 months, who had, according to the social worker's notes, told the hospital she would not be coming back. Diane called the daughter the next morning, not her place, strictly speaking, but she did it anyway. Told her that her mother appeared to be showing new signs of awareness and that a visit might be meaningful. The daughter came that afternoon. Diane wasn't on shift. She heard from a colleague that the visit had lasted 2 hours, that the daughter had cried, that Agnes's eyes had tracked her face the entire time. Agnes passed away 11 days later, peacefully in the early morning, with her daughter in the chair beside her. The East Corridor has been quiet since. No more voices at 3 a.m., no more name in the empty hall. Diane still has the notebook, 11 entries, and then a 12th that she never finished writing because she went into the room instead. She thinks about Agnes sometimes when she walks that corridor, about the 37 nights between the first time she heard her name and the night she finally stopped and listened to where it was really coming from. She had almost dismissed it entirely, had almost let the neuroscience win. She is glad, every time she thinks about it, that she didn't. The orderly who found a bed that was never on the floor plan. Marcus had been an orderly at Riverside Community for 2 years. His job moved him through every floor, every wing, every corridor of the building in the course of a single shift. He knew the layout the way you know a place you navigate in the dark, not by thinking about it, just by moving through it. Left at the nurse's station, right at the supply room, straight past the family waiting area, through the double doors. He knew every room, every alcove, every storage closet and linen cupboard and equipment bay, which is why, on a Wednesday night in October, when he turned a corner in the basement corridor and found a room he had never seen before, he stopped walking entirely. The basement of Riverside Community was mostly utility space. Boiler rooms, electrical panels, the central supply storage, the morgue at the far end of the East Wing. Marcus had been down there hundreds of times. He knew every door. This door was between the electrical panel room and the linen storage, a standard hospital room door, the same design as every patient room in the building, with a narrow wire glass window set into it at eye height. It had a room number placard. The number was 0014. No room in the hospital had a 4-digit number starting with 0. The numbering system went by floor. Basement rooms were B series. This had never been B anything. It had never been anything. Marcus looked through the wire glass window. There was a bed inside. A standard hospital bed made up with white linens, the kind of precise institutional making that housekeeping did on unoccupied rooms. A monitor on a stand to the left of the bed, powered off, an IV pole, a bedside table with nothing on it, an unoccupied patient room in the basement. That did not exist. Marcus did not open the door. He took a photograph with his phone and went back upstairs. Found his supervisor, a man named Gerald, who had worked at Riverside for 22 years, showed him the photograph. Gerald looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "Where exactly did you take this?" Marcus took him down. Gerald stood in the basement corridor and looked at the door and said nothing for almost 30 seconds. Then he said, "That door is supposed to be sealed." Marcus asked what was behind it. Gerald said it was a room that had been decommissioned in 1987, following an incident he didn't detail. The door had been sealed as part of the decommissioning, a plate over the handle, the frame caulked, the room number placard removed. Standard procedure for a permanently closed space. The seal was gone. The placard was back. The handle was functional. Gerald tested it. The door opened. The room inside was exactly as Marcus had seen through the window. Made bed, powered off monitor, IV pole, bedside table. The linens on the bed were clean. Hospital issue, current stock. Gerald checked the lot number on the pillowcase. Distributed from Central Supply within the last 6 weeks. Someone had made that bed recently. Had brought current stock linens down to a room that had been sealed since 1987 and made it up as though a patient were expected. Facilities was called. Security was called. Both walked through the room and found nothing beyond what Marcus and Gerald had already found. No sign of who had done it, or when, or why. The incident report went to administration. Administration ordered the room resealed, this time with a deadbolt keyed only to the facilities director. They noted in their report that unauthorized access to decommissioned spaces was a security concern and would be reviewed. Marcus asked Gerald later that week what the incident in 1987 had been. Gerald was quiet for a long time before he answered. He said a patient had died in that room. Not unusually. Patients died in hospitals. But the circumstances had been difficult, the family had been difficult, and the administration of the time had decided the cleanest resolution was to close the room permanently and redistribute the floor space elsewhere. Marcus asked what the patient's name was. Gerald didn't remember, or said he didn't. Marcus went back to the basement corridor 3 days after the room was resealed, stood outside the new dead-bolted door, looked through the wire glass window. The bed had been stripped, linens gone, mattress bare. The room returned to the state of a space that had been closed for decades. The monitor on the stand was on, powered up, screen glowing green in the dim room, showing a steady flat line. Nobody had the key but the facilities director, who was on vacation. Marcus took another photograph, sent it to Gerald. Gerald's reply came 4 minutes later. 3 words: "Leave it alone." Marcus transferred to a different floor the following month. He still works at Riverside, still moves through the building every shift with the confidence of someone who knows the layout by instinct. He doesn't go to the basement anymore. Some doors, he has decided, are sealed for reasons that have nothing to do with space redistribution. And some rooms, regardless of what administration puts on the incident report, are waiting for something. He doesn't want to be there when it arrives. The ICU monitor that kept showing a flat line for a patient still alive. The ICU is the most monitored environment in any hospital. Everything is measured. Everything is logged. The technology is redundant by design. If one system fails, another catches it. If one reading is anomalous, 3 others cross-reference it. The entire architecture of the space is built on the principle that nothing should go undetected, which is what made what happened to patient David Solis so difficult for the staff to explain. Because it didn't go undetected, it was detected repeatedly by multiple systems. The systems just couldn't agree on whether David Solis was alive. David was 44 years old, admitted to the ICU at St. Benedictine following a severe cardiac event. He had been resuscitated in the field by paramedics and arrived in critical but stable condition. His prognosis was uncertain in the way that ICU prognoses often are, day by day, sometimes hour by hour. But he was alive, conscious in intervals and responding to treatment. He was on full monitoring. Every vital tracked, logged, and displayed on both the bedside monitor and the central nurse's station screen. The first anomaly occurred on his 3rd night. Night shift nurse Patricia was at the central station at 1:22 a.m. when David Solis's readout on the station monitor flatlined. Full cardiac arrest indication. Every alarm on the station triggered simultaneously. She ran, called the code. The team was moving before she reached the room. David Solis was lying in his bed, awake, mildly startled by the sudden arrival of 6 medical staff. His bedside monitor showed all vitals normal. Heart rate 74, blood pressure stable, oxygen saturation 97%. The central station, when Patricia looked back at it from the doorway, still showed a flat line. 2 monitors, same patient, same moment, completely different readings. Biomedical engineering was called. They checked the connection between the bedside monitor and the central system, found a signal transmission fault, a loose connection in the telemetry line that had caused the bedside data to fail to reach the station correctly. The station, receiving no signal, had defaulted to a flatline display. Logical, documented, fixed within the hour. David Solis was mildly amused when it was explained to him the next morning. He said he appreciated the quick response either way. The second anomaly occurred 2 nights later. This time it was the bedside monitor that flatlined at 3:08 a.m. while David was asleep. Patricia, same nurse, same shift, saw it from the doorway during rounds. Walked in quickly. David was breathing, color normal, clearly alive. She checked his pulse manually while looking at the monitor, strong and steady under her fingers. Flatline on the screen. She tapped the monitor. The display jumped. All vitals restored. Reading correctly, the flatline gone as suddenly as it had appeared. Biomedical engineering again. This time they found nothing wrong with the monitor, ran full diagnostics, replaced it anyway with a new unit as a precaution. The third anomaly occurred on David's 7th night. Both monitors flatlined simultaneously. Bedside and central station, every alarm in the ICU triggered. The team ran. David Solis was sitting up in bed, alert, looking at the monitors with an expression that Patricia later described as not alarmed, something closer to resigned. She asked him how he felt. He said, "Fine. I keep dreaming that I'm not, though." She asked what he meant. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he kept having the same dream, that he was lying in the bed and the monitors were going off and people were running into the room. But in the dream, they couldn't see him. They looked at the bed and it was empty. They looked right through him and called out that there was no patient and started to leave. And in the dream, he kept trying to say something to make them hear him, but nothing came out. He said he'd had the dream 3 times. Patricia finished her checks, noted the anomaly, told him it was just a dream, that he was very much present and accounted for, and that the monitors were malfunctioning and would be sorted by morning. She walked back to the station and sat down and stared at the screen for a long time. 3 dreams, 3 anomalies, on the same nights. She didn't write that part in the report. There was no box for it. David Solis was discharged 18 days after admission. He recovered well, better than the initial prognosis had suggested. He walked out of St. Benedictine on a Thursday afternoon and did not look back. Patricia was at the station when he left. He stopped and thanked her specifically, which patients sometimes do and which she always appreciated. Then he said, almost as an afterthought, "I stopped having that dream when the monitors stopped doing that. Did you ever figure out what was wrong with them?" She told him engineering had found a system fault, that it was fixed. He nodded, seemed satisfied with that. She has thought about his question many times since, about the monitors and the dreams running in perfect parallel, about a man lying in a bed that the machines kept insisting was empty, about what it means when the technology designed to tell you someone is alive keeps saying otherwise. She doesn't have an answer. Neither did biomedical engineering, fully. But David Solis went home, and the monitors, since his discharge, have not flatlined for any patient without cause. Whatever the machines were seeing, or failing to see, it left when he did. Patricia finds that either comforting or deeply unsettling depending on the night. On the hard nights, she's still not sure which.